Good afternoon. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Mark Green, president of the International Republican Institute, a nonprofit dedicated to advancing democracy and human liberty around the world. We have a great program. We have talented speakers, and as you can see, we have an overflow crowd. Please take your seat so I can take my seat, and we can get things going. Several organizations have generously sponsored our program today. The cards on your seats list them, as well as the hashtags that you can use during the proceedings. Now, this event wouldn't be possible without the generosity of Chevron, a great corporate citizen that cares about American leadership and about America's role in the world. Representing Chevron with a few words of welcome is Bill Tozel, Manager of Federal Government Affairs for Chevron. Bill?
Thank you, Mr. Green, and really can't thank you enough for the leadership and the partnership that IRI provides for our company and companies that operate all around the world. It's an incredible day today. You have an incredible amount of information, and I think that by the end of the day, we'll realize how important and how timely the work is that IRI has done over time and continues to do. Building and strengthening the institutions of democracy and freedom are as critical now as they were back when our great President Reagan launched this effort. So once again, thank you all for your attendance, and we look forward to a great day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Frank Fahrenkopf. I was chairman of the Republican National Committee during the Reagan years and was the founding first president of IRI back in 1983 when we created it. I currently serve as the co-chairman of the Commission on Presidential Debates, which does the general election debates. Please, we had nothing to do with the primary debates. And my task is to give you a little background with President Reagan's involvement in this movement. Because not only was his view on bringing peace to the world and fighting communism and other evils, peace through strength, which I think you're going to hear a lot about from our panelists after we're through. But in 1981, President Reagan sent me and Ed Rollins, who was then the deputy White House political director, to a meeting of the European Democrat Union in Munich. The EDU had been started by European leaders like Margaret Thatcher and Helmut Kohl and others to create an organization of center and right-of-center political parties. And Rollins and I went there to observe what was going on, to determine whether or not the Republican Party of the United States, under President Reagan, should become a part of such a movement. We spent a couple of days there. At that time, the EDU was run by Elias Mack of Austria, who I'm glad to hear. I checked today that he's still alive. And he was a great, great man. I haven't seen or heard from him in years and years and years. Ed and I then journeyed to Bonn. We met with Chancellor Kohl, although he was not chancellor at that time. He had not yet become chancellor. And we went and met with the leaders of all the Stiftungen, interested in the manner in which the Stiftungen were formed and working in democracy around the world, how they were financed, and so forth. Ed and I came back, reported to President Reagan, and that gave rise in 1983 to that wonderful, 82 I guess it was, on it, to that great speech at Westminster, indicating that the United States and the Republican Party would be involved in democracy work. We then created the National Endowment for Democracy. I created IRI as the Republican Party chairman. Charles Manat was then the chairman of the Democratic Party, and he created NDI. The Chamber of Commerce created their foundation and institute, as did Organized Labor. And National Endowment of Democracy still exists and works around the world with our institutions. I then flew in July of 1983 with Vice President George Herbert Walker Bush to London, where Margaret Thatcher hosted the first organizational meeting of the International Democrat Union, which was formed and from then went forward and still exists today. We have many representatives from countries in Europe and around the world from the IDU with us today. And I've just been told, that means stretch, right, Mark? traffic and so forth to get the governor here, which he's on his way. He'll be shortly here. We then in creating the National Endowment for Democracy, we could not follow the model of the German Stiftungen because money went directly from the federal government of Germany to the Stiftungen. We couldn't do that, and that's why the National Endowment for Democracy was created, and it became, in effect, an umbrella organization which feeds, and at the beginning was the only way that the party institutes had the funds to start our democracy work around the world. So the president was not only concerned with peace through strength, which clearly we saw he had that ability. You know, I think back to the way the President Reagan, when he was first elected, was covered, primarily in Europe, but also here in the United States. The media said there is no way this man can lead this nation. You couldn't trust this cowboy actor, remember, with his finger on the nuclear button. But he was a man who was so satisfied. Everyone said he was comfortable in his skin, and he really was in this particular area. Because not only did he believe through the IDU and through the creation of the National Endowment for Democracy that we were involved in an intellectual war with communism and the Soviet Union, etc., but that peace through strength was the only way that peace would develop. We had to have a strong national defense in this country, had to have strong allies who were ready, who were prepared to defend democracy around the world. He had to have the courage to make some very, very hard decisions. And those of you who were alive back then, there's a lot of you in this audience who were not, I can see you. Don't shake your head, Nicholson, you were alive. I should introduce another former chairman of the Republican National Committee, Jim Nicholson. Jim, stand up. But it had to be a marriage of peace through strength, a marriage with the intellectual fight to defeat the enemies of freedom, the enemies of democracy around the world. And he had the courage to do some tough things. I can remember when he walked away from Reykjavik, and the world said, and all the newspapers in this country said that summit was a failure with Gorbachev, but we now know that that was where the Soviet Union started the downslide and their end. So Ronald Reagan, and you're going to see here in a second, and I can't stretch it anymore without telling dirty jokes or something like that, so I'm going to get off the stage. And this episode that you're going to see here, which was prepared, is a dedication to President Reagan's belief in democracy and support thereof. Thanks.
(1982), the Cold War rages. Many politicians describe the world in terms of banks and bullets, but President Reagan sees it as a battle of ideas, a competition between freedom and oppression, liberty and tyranny. The first American president to speak before the British Parliament, he issues a bold call to the community of democracies.
We must be staunch in our conviction that freedom is not the sole prerogative of a lucky few, but the inalienable and universal right of all human beings. We in America now intend to take additional steps, as many of our allies have already done, toward realizing this same goal. The chairman and other leaders of the National Republican and Democratic Party organizations are initiating a study with the Bipartisan American Political Foundation to determine how the United States can best contribute as a nation to the global campaign for democracy now gathering force. We must take actions to assist the campaign for democracy.
President Reagan's words inspire the founding of the International Republican Institute in 1983. For over 30 years, IRI has worked to foster liberty throughout the world, helping young emerging democracies take root, sharing knowledge so existing democracies grow stronger.
We impose nothing. Instead, we try to help those who are seeking a voice in their own future, give them the tools to have that voice.
Yet optimism is in order, because day by day, democracy is proving itself to be a not at all fragile flower.
While totalitarian regimes have crumbled, IRI has been a powerful and enduring force for freedom, helping to build Ronald Reagan's infrastructure of democracy in Asia, South America, Eastern Europe, Africa, and the Middle East. So freedom is not the sole prerogative of a lucky few.
But what that really means is helping people have a say in their governance, helping people determine how to make a better life for themselves.
To help spread the blessings of democracy, IRI is working to empower the disenfranchised, women, youth, and other marginalized communities. IRI is giving life to President Reagan's vision of a world where freedom is a universal right, helping strengthen democracy worldwide to meet the dangerous and deadly new challenges of repression and totalitarianism.
We have not inherited an easy world. There are threats now to our freedom, indeed to our very existence, that other generations could never even have imagined.
People don't flee democracies, they flee to democracies, and that's part of what we're seeing in the world today.
IRI is proving democracy is not a fragile flower, but a strong antidote to slavery and depression, and the hope of freedom-loving people everywhere.
Well, the task I've set forth will long outlive our own generation. Let us now begin a major effort to secure the best, a crusade for freedom that will engage the faith and fortitude of the next generation. For the sake of peace and justice, let us move toward a world in which all people are at last free to determine their own destiny.
Well, thank you. On behalf of the International Republican Institute, I'm very pleased to welcome Governor Kasich. From our point of view, the governor embodies the best American ideals that IRI works to share with our partners around the world. The governor was successful in public service because he always put people, and specifically his constituents, at the center of his agenda as a congressman and then as a governor. He understands that good policy makes good politics. As a young member of Congress, Governor Kasich worked with President Reagan, and through his early work in Congress, understands the importance of America's role in the world. The governor often reminds us of President Reagan's approach to issues and the need to maintain trade ties and engagement with international coalitions and supporting, not turning our back on democratic actors around the world. So what I want you to do now is to join me in welcoming the great governor of the great state. I was going to do great state. I got great state.
Jim Nicholson, how about, come on, recognize him. Stand up and get a round of applause. Oh, you already recognized him? He's the kind of guy who wants a lot of attention, so it's glad it worked out. Well, listen, I don't know how she knew I was coming because I just came up the back stairs, and I just made a few notes because when I was asked to come to this event, I sort of like have a lot of things I'm trying to do, and I thought, okay, do I want to go? Do I not want to go? And a nice young man called and invited me, and I thought, well, hell yes, because this is important stuff. Norm, how are you? One of the great ones. So I just made a few notes that I want to talk to you about. maybe I should tell you my conclusion before I get to the specifics. Let me just tell you what I'm concerned about for my family and for all of us. When I look around the world, what is it that I see? I see growing nationalism. There's nothing wrong with nationalism until it becomes extreme. We all love our countries, but we know what growing nationalism to an extreme amount can mean. Secondly, there is an increasing tide of isolationism. Let me just take care of us. Let's just pull the shades down, let's lock the doors, and let's just forget the rest of the world. We'll just take care of ourselves. Thirdly, there is a growing pattern, as we all know, of anti-immigration. I think there's two ways. I mean, everybody in this room would agree you need to have proper integration. But when I look at immigration, I look at a new level of energy. I look at immigration as an opportunity. I mean, one of the things that we face in Ohio is a stagnant growth of population. We want people to come to Ohio. We want to integrate these folks, and we want them to become part of our economic dynamo. And so this refrain we hear around the world, and I understand some of the problems we have, is this anti-immigration, to me, is not healthy. And then we think about trade. Now, I have to tell you, I've never been a doctrinaire free trader. I mean, I was a time when I was in Congress, if you weren't for free trade, they wanted to run you out of the building. And I would always ask, what about these trade deals? What about the cheating? And what about all this other stuff? But at the end of the day, I found myself coming down on the side of trade, relationships. And so we see in the world growing nationalism, growing isolationism, anti-immigration, and anti-trade. Now, if you put all that together, what does that stew look like? What does that mean for the world? What does it mean for stability? What does it mean for peace? What does it mean for relationships? I think I'm very worried about it. I'm very, very concerned about it. The alliances. We think NATO doesn't matter? Are we kidding? And let me ask you a question. What would we put in its place? And what are we supposed to tell everybody to be on their own? What about the Russians? We look at Brexit. Who was the happiest man in the world with Brexit? Vladimir Putin. Well, you were the happiest man in the world? Okay. Are you sure you're at IRI and not the other one? But anyway, but I understand, the bureaucracy. I understand the fact that you have Brussels that have a lot of unelected bureaucrats who, by the way, are appointed by elected people. And I understand the frustration without being able to control certain things. But the guy who was the happiest about the weakening of those relationships over there was Putin. And by the way, I kind of like the idea that the Brits were a strong voice in terms of the kinds of things we care about on global security. And now their voices are going to be muted. So who the heck is, and then I'm reading in the papers about the fact that, well, some of these countries think maybe these sanctions against the Russians are not necessary and maybe we ought to have better engagement. Put me on the hawk side, okay? I don't agree with that. And I look at the concern that those in the Baltics have, and I'm concerned about Russian aggression. I didn't tell you it's coming tomorrow, but what I do know is the weaker that alliance is, the more opportunity there is for people to exploit weakness, and it makes me very, very nervous to see that happening. Let me tell you one other thing. As long as I'm breathing air, I'm for arming the Ukrainians that want to fight for their own freedom over in the Ukraine. Okay. So it must have been a terrible mistake that apparently arming the Ukrainians somehow was left out of the Republican platform. I'd heard that. I haven't read the platform. Of course, I've never heard of anybody who's ever run for president ever did read the platform, but I'm told it's not in there. Now, when we talk about the alliances, of course, having been in Congress, and Norm was there, we talked about these kinds of things. We're always frustrated with the fact that these countries don't pull their full load. I mean, it's been that way from the beginning. And by the way, you know, I guess some people would have complained that post-World War II, maybe we shouldn't have helped rebuild Europe. I mean, I think we've had a great, great success as a result of the things that we did with the Marshall Plan to rebuild Europe. Of course we ought to be pounding on these countries to get their GDP commitment up on defense. But, you know, the way I look at it, there's a scripture that says that to whom much is given, much is expected. And if we expect these countries to just do everything we want in terms of carrying their share of the load, we're going to be perpetually disappointed. That doesn't take away from the fact that we need to be aggressive in terms of asking them to do more than what they do. And frankly, if you look at the record, you will find that a number of these countries are doing more than has been presented by the popular or sometimes tabloid media. But there should be no free rides. And I would tell you that I believe that we have to be extremely concerned, of course, not about our greatest threat today, which is radical Islam, but I am really concerned about the growing aggressiveness of China as a nation that has put some fear in the hearts and minds of some of our allies in Asia, becoming more aggressive, more totalitarian, less interested in any movement in the area of human rights. I just think the West has to be clear in where we stand. We don't need to have a war with China. We don't have to have a war with Russia, but they need to understand what we are all about, that we are freedom-loving people in the West, and it's critically important. I didn't know I had 2 minutes. I'm going longer. So then I want to talk to you about trade. Just a few things about trade. I had some people come to see me because this has been a tough issue, and I think our elected officials will tell you that if you don't always fight the trade battle, you can lose, because the easiest thing to say is shut down the trade. And, you know, let's just forget it. Let's not trade. When I was a younger man, I can remember when the argument was that the Japanese were going to dominate the world. And they started shipping all of their cars in here. And I kind of reflected on that. And you know what happened to American cars when Japanese cars entered our markets? Our cars got better. And trade is not only an economic issue, but when I look at TPP, and I don't know all the details in TPP, but here's what I would say. I don't think we can afford to walk away from our friends in Asia. I mean, trade is not just an issue of economics, it's also an issue of global security. Now, the challenge for all of us in the area of trade is what we're going to do about training. And this gets to all of you as you return home. This is just my opinion. And look, today we are going to find, my daughters are 16 years old, twins. It's likely that they're going to have 5 jobs over the course of their lifetime. Things are changing so much. We've entered, as this book I've been reading talks about, the second machine age, the era of digitization. When we think about that, it's exponential change. Are we preparing our young people for that? Are we preparing our young people to be resilient? Are we preparing our system to literally train people, once they lose their work, for another job where they can really have a decent income? In all of those levels, I think we're falling short. I'm thinking in Ohio about adopting the Cristo Rey model. I want kids to go to school for 3 weeks, and the 4th week, I want them to go work in business or wherever they want to go, so they can begin to understand what the workplace is and what the skills are that's necessary. I just really believe that we need to have 21st century education to meet the 21st century challenge. Reforming public education is relatively easy. You stand here and you run as hard as you can into that wall. And then after you do it about 10 times, you might chip off a piece of it. Here in Cleveland, we have had major reform of our schools. The unions, the teachers, the administrators, the business leaders, the political leaders have all come together to say we need fundamental change because we're failing our children. We're about to undergo a massive change in the city of Youngstown, where we brought a great reformer from Chicago who's had great success in the Chicago schools in terms of trying to make education something that provides real value. and gives people a sense of resilience and responsibility. And then for those who do work and get older, we have to have lifelong learning. We have to constantly give people an ability through competency testing, whatever it is, and online training to make sure that they can take the next job. Because what's happening in our country is people are being dislocated. The job they had no longer exists, and they struggle. And if we don't begin to meet this challenge in a significant way, we're going to see more polarization, more division, more loss of income. And in an era where this whole world is changing so dramatically, we need to have systems in place. And you have to drive it. Forget Congress. You do it. Go into your school district. Find out what they're doing for your children and your grandchildren. Make sure this system of higher education is going to push graduation. We need to lower our costs. I mean, all these things really have to be done. And then finally, because I don't want to be too rude here, during my campaign, I had suggested, and Chris got all screwed up, you remember we had the Radio Free Europe, the institutions we built during the Cold War to send a message to people who were being held captive. I do not understand why we are not reviving these types of organizations that would be able to pronounce Jewish, Christian, Muslim, whoever in the world wants to talk about what it means to be a citizen in civilization. I mean, look at the battle that's going on. There is no way in this world that we should not be making it clear to people who live in the dark, or who live on the fence, that somehow you get a trip to paradise by blowing innocent men, women, and children up. Whether you kill them on a train or run over them in a rally or blow them up in an airport, where's the civilized world saying it is not acceptable? We need the rabbis and the preachers and the imams, and we need them all to begin to win the battle of ideas in this world. Now, we're going to have to win the military battle, but we have to win the battle of ideas. So, thanks for letting me be here. I appreciated the opportunity. We need to stand engaged. And you know what? Every single person in this room matters. Every single person in this room knows people, whether it is in your religious setting or in your schoolhouse or in the workplace or when you're playing fantasy football. We all have an obligation and a responsibility to make sure that America leads the way to an improving, successful world that's going to give every human being an ability to realize their God-given potential. So thank you for allowing me to be here today, and I'll see you around Cleveland. Thanks.
Governor John Kasich, everyone. Thinking back to that video that you saw a few moments ago, I read somewhere that President Reagan's speech to Parliament infuriated the Soviets more than anything else that he had said or done to that point. Maybe they understood that he was calling for something far more powerful than mere bombs and bullets. He was calling for that battle of ideas that you've heard referenced. Democracy, human dignity and liberty, the right to own and create, freedom of conscience, freedom of expression. Powerful ideas offering hope to men and women from every country and culture, every race, every creed. As Reagan put it, not the sole prerogative of a lucky few, but the universal right of all mankind. I believe the Soviets were infuriated because the Soviets were afraid. Today we're gathered here because you and I believe that those same values, those same ideas can be an antidote for the extremism and the repression that we see in far too many places around this world. Reagan said to Parliament that we have not inherited an easy world. We look around, and these days that is certainly true. But it's also true that there's a new generation of voices, an emerging generation of leaders who are once again ready to mobilize the arsenal of democracy. These leaders believe America needs to be engaged in the world. They believe in peace through strength. And they believe that real strength comes from using all the tools of our leadership: defense and diplomacy, development and democracy. They believe America is the last best hope of man on earth. And with that comes an awesome responsibility. So now let's hear from some of those new voices. And we'll begin with the man who's going to lead us through this discussion. My friend Peter Roskam is an important leader in the U.S. House of Representatives. He's a member of the powerful Ways and Means Committee. He serves on the board of the National Endowment for Democracy, and he chairs the bipartisan House Democracy Partnership. In short, he's one of the good guys. Ladies and gentlemen, Peter Roskam.
Well, thank you all. And I was really struck by something Mark said in the video, and that is this notion about what we've inherited in a sense. And I'm reminded of a quote that is attributable to St. Ambrose from the 4th century. And he said this. Now, this was in the context of his faith, but you can think about it in a larger context that we're dealing with. He said, "We don't impose on the world. We propose a more excellent way." We don't impose on the world. We propose a more excellent way. Think about that as we're having this discussion about hard power, soft power, role of the United States in the world today, and we're going to get right at this. Now, we've got some business to do because our IRI staffer, who I'm going to be obedient towards, by the way, is going to tell us the timing that we've got to deal with. We've got 2 panels of smart, interesting people that have good insights. We're anticipating Speaker Paul Ryan joining us toward the end. So if I'm starting to move the traffic, Senator, I'm looking at you, then don't be offended, and I'll just try and be as directive as I can. So let me quickly introduce our 3 panelists. First is Senator David Perdue, who's the senator from Georgia. His background is that he was the CEO of 2 brands that you've heard of. One is Reebok and the other is Dollar General. He's married to his wife, Bonnie, for 43 years. He serves on a number of committees in the United States Senate: Ag, Budget, Judiciary, Aging, but I think poignantly and importantly for today, he serves on the Foreign Affairs Committee, where he chairs the subcommittee on State Department and U.S. aid management. Next to him is my former colleague in the House of Representatives, Luis Fortuño, who is the former governor of Puerto Rico. When he was governor, the wheels were on the cart. I'm just saying. He has a long background in tourism and economic development. As I said, he was the resident commissioner for 4 years, representing Puerto Rico in the United States Congress. And then finally, General Richard Hawley, who has been active with the U.S. GLC, and that's an organization that we'll hear a little bit more about today and has been active in hosting this today. His deployments are too numerous to mention, but he had over 400 combat missions, and his most recent assignment was serving as the commander of Air Combat Command, an incredible responsibility. So, General, let's start with you. President Reagan, in his speech, basically called out in a way and was encouraging in a way to this notion of not just hard power. In other words, how does the softer power, how does emerging democracy, how does U.S. aid play into the whole palette that we have to see happen or be available around the world? And I'm going to sit down and join you for the discussion. But General, could you start us off?
Sure. I think Governor Kasich started that. Talked about the Marshall Plan. Talked about our investments in Japan at the end of World War II to resurrect that country and turn it into the great democracy it is today. I look at those as great successes. We moved on to Korea in the early 50s, which was on the verge of becoming taken over by the Chinese communists. And we rescued that with a strong military force. But then came our investments in resurrecting that country's democracy, its economy. And today it's one of our greatest trade partners and a great success in the world. You've all seen the map of Korea at night, where it's dark in the north and light in the south. And I think that's what that brings. Then we've had some failures. I was in Vietnam. That's where I got all those combat missions, and that didn't turn out so well. Why didn't it turn out well? Why have not some of the more recent interventions turned out well? In my view, it's because we didn't understand the need to make sure we had the ability to govern the place when the military operation was finished. How do you get prepared to govern a place like Vietnam or Iraq or Afghanistan? It's with diplomacy, it's with aid, it's with people who understand the region, the people, the culture, and they can understand how to get in place leaders and groups and organizations that can take over and govern the place when we leave, because I got to tell you, we in the military aren't very good at it. We don't govern really well. I got brought up and learned my trade, which is basically to break things, not to build things, not to govern things. And that's what the whole of government approach brings. We talk military people, when they talk about planning today, you ask them to build a plan, they'll give you a whole of government plan. It involves diplomacy, it involves economics, it involves an information plan. The problem is when they look in their toolkit, it's full of hammers. There aren't many of those other tools in there that you can use to bring those softer elements of power to play and produce success after the military has done its job, cleaned out the bad guys, established a secure environment. But if somebody doesn't step in at that point, we don't win.
Governor, let me ask you to go deeper then. If the general is talking about essentially a holistic approach, and that was, in a nutshell, what he was saying, needing all of these different tools, can you get us down into sort of the heart and soul of this matter? Ronald Reagan said a very provocative thing. I can't quote it, but we've seen it up a couple of times, and it's on the Twitter account, where he's basically saying, look, this freedom is not just for the people that can scrap their way to freedom. It actually belongs to all of mankind. So can you give us a perspective based on your connections within Latin America in particular, what that notion is, sort of that spirit of freedom, and how it plays out in the public square today?
Well, freedom is actually an aspiration that every man and woman in the world has. It's not unique to us. And actually, however, what's unique to us is that we are still seen, perceived in the world as a beacon of light. Not so much lately, however. A lot of people's aspirations depend on how we act, and again, it doesn't have to be with hammers all the time. Actually, lately, more and more often, it can be with other tools. This is extremely powerful. Everyone around the world has one, and we ought to be using it more often. And there are things that our leaders can do. I'll give you a couple of examples of things that they can do. In 2007, President Bush actually recognized the fight for freedom of one of our, the main Cuban dissidents, Dr. Bisset, and granted him the Medal of Freedom. He could not actually be recognized in person until 10 years later. But that was a very important step. In 2010, in Cuba again, Guillermo Fariñas, who was granted that year the EU's Sakharov's freedom recognition, he was in a hunger strike for 134 days. There was silence from our end. I would call him. I was just the governor of a small island in the Caribbean. I would call him regularly and speak with him while he was in hunger strike. Women in white in Cuba. Nowadays in Venezuela, 85% of the Venezuelans actually at best get 2 meals a day. 85%. They're yearning, of course, for food, but more importantly, they're yearning for freedom. And we are not providing that leadership that our nation needs to provide, and much less even trying to work with those around them to actually promote those ideas.
Thank you. Senator, if you're in the most exclusive club in the world as a United States Senator, and you are, you're in the most exclusive, part of the most exclusive club in terms of this group that is a member of the Foreign Relations Committee. And you've got a responsibility then, as I mentioned in your introduction, chairing and having an oversight responsibility as it relates to State Department management and USAID. Can you give us a sense from your perspective, Senator, about how these things interact, in particular, the notion of democracy promotion in particular. And from your vantage point as a member of the Foreign Relations Committee, how are you seeing democracy promotion in particular as something that we need to advocate and stand for? And how do you talk about that at home in Georgia when you're home? And does that resonate at home? Can you just give a perspective?
You have about 45 minutes for that, right? Well, it's an honor to be here. Thank you for hosting this. Let me just give you a perspective. I've been on the Foreign Relations Committee about 18 months now. I've traveled extensively. I lived before in my business career, though, in Europe a couple of times, in Asia a couple of times. I've worked outside of the country most of my career. And so there's a unique perspective here, and I want to try to share it. I believe the world's more dangerous right now than at any time in my lifetime. And I'm a product of the Cold War, and many of you are as well. But I think we're living in a more dangerous, more complex public arena right now internationally. I think you've got the rise of Russia and China right now, and they're doing it in ways that we've not seen before. The second thing is you've got ISIS is spreading around. I believe our country's been invaded right now. I think this is just the same as if some country mounted ships at our borders and invaded our country. The rise of homegrown terrorism is a new phenomenon, and we've got to deal with that. That's an invasion of our freedom and our security here at home. But we're dealing with something else. We're dealing with rogue nations like Iran and North Korea who are developing nuclear capability, where the threat of mutual annihilation is not a deterrent. And then we talk about right now a new hybrid war. General, I respect you so much for what you did in Vietnam. You don't get enough appreciation from all of us. I want to thank you for that publicly. But I think, thank you. But I have to say, today is a new war. I just had this conversation with General Dunford a few weeks ago. I mean, we have a hybrid game going on right now in Eastern Europe. You've got cyber war, you've got propaganda war, and this is something that we've not seen in an asymmetric world. And lastly, we have an arms race in space. Now, underpinning all of that is our inability, our growing inability, to fund foreign aid as well as our own security requirements because of our own irresponsibility financially. So when other people around the world ask me a question, the number one, every leader of every country I've met, and there are dozens of them right now, the number one question is, when is America going to lead again? We don't need you to be the policeman of the world anymore, but we need you to lead. And the number one they think that we need to lead in is we need to perform better our own responsibility with our own democratic system, be more financially responsible, and then be a bigger proponent for freedom. We met with President el-Sisi in Egypt. He's got a tough equation right now. And Lindsey Graham and I had a tough conversation with him about what aid he's getting from the U.S. and what we're not getting back from him. And our question for him, pleading with him, was help us help you. And so he reminded us of our shortcomings here in our history, but we reminded him that this is the 21st century and we've got to solve those today. So I think they go hand in glove, economic development and helping people feed themselves, as well as providing a strong security here at home, and as well as helping other people provide this international security. But let me say one other thing. The thing that I see missing in the world today is hope. When people lose hope, they become disenfranchised. I saw it in Latin America early in my career, in Haiti, and even in the Dominican Republic. I've seen it around the world now in Egypt, Saudi Arabia even. Just got back from Pakistan and Afghanistan. And I have to tell you that people are losing hope. 60 million people in the world right now have lost their homes. They're wandering the face of the earth and having lost their home. That's a point in time where democracy is not the first thing on their list agenda. They want to be fed and they want to be secure, and then we'll talk about how to govern ourselves.
General, let's pick up on one of the themes that the Senator just laid out, and that was the United States leading. Can you go back? Let's go back to Plan Colombia, for example. Can you give us a little bit of insight as to it was a bipartisan effort, it was successful, it was you look back and say, wow, I mean that was quite the effort.
Yeah, I talked about some of our problems, but Plan Colombia is one where it's a real success story. It started in the late 90s. It was proposed by the then leader of Colombia. It was embraced by the United States under President Clinton, then furthered by President Bush. In the early days, we focused on providing aid to security, which in a military guy's sense is the right thing to do. Secure the place first. As you pointed out, Senator, people need to be secure. And then it morphed into a program focused on the more social needs of people, clean water, electricity, education. And today, The murder rate in Colombia is down. I mean, I can't give you the numbers, but way down. Crime rates are way down. The GDP is coming up. And important to us, which was part of our motivation to begin with, narco trafficking has been significantly reduced. And so this was a great win-win program involving security assistance, economic assistance, all kinds of training, both military and non-military. And Colombia today is a much better place because of it.
Governor, when last August I was in Jerusalem and I had a chance to visit with Natan Sharansky, the great refusenik. And during that time, I asked him to confirm a story that I had read about him. And he confirmed this. And he said that when Ronald Reagan gave his speech and he called the Soviet Union the evil empire, it was so encouraging to Sharansky and the other refuseniks. And they said, when the American president called evil for what it was, we knew it was the beginning of the end. And he tells a great story about it. It's really, really remarkable. Can you give us a sense, where do we need to name things what they need to be? I think about the example in Cuba, and there seems to be sort of this conflation and mischaracterization of things, and it's very important for us, I think, to name things properly if we're going to confront things.
And this has to be a bipartisan effort. Remember what the world was like when Henry Jackson was senator, Democrat, and actually he was a leader in Congress in actually calling things for what they were for the Soviet Jewish community and actually forcing the country to allow them to come out and actually to freedom. And that was key because it was a bipartisan effort. It ought to be a bipartisan effort again. Nowadays, for example, in Venezuela, Venezuelans are fighting really, literally for their lives on a daily basis, in addition to their democracy. And they feel left out. But worse than that is that Venezuelans nowadays have been working very closely with the Iranians. We are not willing, because of other considerations, to actually call them and say, what's going on in the region? What are you promoting in the region? And these ideas in our region, our own backyard, could actually affect and jeopardize our own security. And Senator, you were talking about it. This is a couple of hours away from Florida. And they do have or it could have a direct impact on our freedoms here. So it's time that we provide that leadership like we did, for example, with the Jewish communities in the old Soviet Union, and actually that forced that country to allow them to come out to freedom. Do the same thing in the countries starting in our region, but I would say in other parts of the world as well. And
Senator, last question in just a couple of minutes. Without breaching any confidences, as you're interacting around the world, can you give us some insight what you're hearing from world leaders? In other words, as they're reflecting to you, Senator, we're hoping to see this, that, and the other thing from the United States. And let's stipulate, they're looking for more trade and so forth. Is there an interest in furtherance on the governance side of things, on the democracy growth side of things that they're communicating to you?
Well, if I may, let me do it in three parts of that answer. Okay. One, let's talk about Europe. Eastern Europe is scared to death right now. Kosovo, Macedonia, Croatia. These are countries being bombarded by Russia today. They're destabilized to some degree by what's happening in Russia. And their request of us is to provide a united and consistent NATO, a strong NATO. I mean, I won't go through the military numbers, but we're a shadow of ourselves from the standpoint of standing up to the Soviet Union in the 80s to what we have to stand up right now in the Balkans. Kaliningrad, for example, has 25,000 troops. That's 65 miles across the border through Lithuania to Belarus. Within 60 hours, Russia could take all three Baltic states, Latvia, Estonia, and Lithuania. Let's talk about the Middle East. Middle East, what they want is a solution for Syria and Bashar al-Assad and ISIS. It's no more complicated than that. And they want America to lead to that solution. Look, Saudi Arabia right now is ready to put 30,000 troops on the ground, fund them, train them, and so forth. They're being held up because we're not leading in that effort. Not that we need to put more American troops. They're not asking for that. They're not asking for more funding. What they are asking for is a coordinated help to facilitate a building of a Sunni force to defeat ISIS and disrobe Bashar al-Assad. In Asia, we're sitting in a military situation. I'm sorry to tell you this, but we're on parity right now, according to Admiral Harris, in the Pacific with China. They're spending $300 billion a year, and if you adjust that for purchasing power parity, it's some multiple greater than that, compares to our $600 billion here in total. They're doing that in one theater. What they're doing in the South China Sea has unnerved a lot of those people, all the way down to Australia, because these are number one trading partners of China. So I think TPP is a huge step for us. It shows China that what we're going to do is engage with our partners. And it actually encourages China to develop on some things like pollution and labor issues and social issues in order to become a part of that over the long term and to not pursue their own trading bloc of 16 countries. So I think engagement in Asia is the number one thing I hear over there.
Well, thank you, panel, for giving concise, interesting answers in a very short period of time. We really, really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Very well done. That's amazing.
Thank you.
Very well done. It's an honor to meet you.
Likewise.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Good to meet
Thank you.
General, thank you.
Hey, General, how you doing? You did a fabulous job last night. Thank you. I had tears in my eyes. I'm not kidding.
We can only know that there is no choice, because one of two things will happen if we don't lead. Either no one will lead and there will be chaos, or someone will fill the vacuum who does not share our values. My fellow Americans, we do not have a choice. We cannot be reluctant to lead, and you cannot lead from behind.
And the money we're spending to help IRI and NDI, I think, is as important as any battalion we will muster, because you're not going to hold and build without what y'all guys do. And there's so many opportunities in the world right now to give people a new start on life. And I look at this chaos as heartbreaking, but also an opportunity.
A strategy that recognizes the best way to defeat the ideology that uses terror as a weapon is to spread freedom and democracy.
I do not believe in a fate that will fall on us no matter what we do. I do believe in a fate that will fall on us if we do nothing. Above all, we must realize that no arsenal or no weapon in the arsenals of the world is so formidable as the will and moral courage of free men and women. It is a weapon our adversaries in today's world do not have. It is a weapon that we as Americans do have. Let that be understood by those who practice terrorism and prey upon their neighbors.
We'll start with our second panel. We're going to be joined by Senator Ernst, and as soon as she comes, we'll just welcome her on to the stage. Let me introduce these two men who really don't need an introduction. To my immediate right is Senator Tom Cotton. Senator Cotton and I served in the House of Representatives. He didn't stay long. It was sort of like, you know, tag, you're it, and then he was off to the Senate. I've described him as basically a Renaissance man. He's a farmer, lawyer, warrior, senator. And I think what's interesting is that Senator Cotton on his life after 9/11 in a different direction based on the attacks and the viciousness thereof, and he has moved forward, and he's been just an outstanding advocate and great friend in the United States Senate. Lieutenant General Michael Flynn has had too many operational assignments to list. It's really quite overwhelming. He's the former director of the Defense Intelligence Agency. He obviously spoke, as did Senator Cotton, yesterday, and he's the author of The Field of Fight, How We Can Win the Global War Against Radical Islam and Its Allies. So both of you are people of clarity, and you're willing to articulate a worldview that I think is really important. Senator, let me start with you. Can you frame up essentially the nature of this conflict that we're in right now, and can you speak to the rising voices of isolationism in the United States and the temptation to go that route and what we should do about it?
Thanks, Peter. Thank you to IRI for having me, for all of you for coming. Peter, I didn't get to spend very long in the House, but one of the toughest decisions about leaving the House was to leave good friends like Peter. He was one of the very first to encourage me to run for the Senate, which at first I thought was a good sign, and then more and more of my colleagues started encouraging me to run for the Senate. I began to wonder if it was a bad sign that they just wanted to get rid of me. But we've become good friends and sometimes collaborators in making trouble for the administration and their failed policies over the last couple of years. So it's great to be here with Peter, great to be here with General Flynn. I mean, in our fight against radical Islamic Jihad, we face a enemy that is dedicated to our destruction. There's not, they're not trying to reach an accommodation. They don't want to just gain more territory. They don't want to live in peaceful coexistence. They don't hate us for anything we have done in the world. I mean, we've done more for the Muslim peoples of the world than probably any other country. They hate us for who we are, that we are freedom's home and we are freedom's defender, and we can give them no quarter. And as long as we do, then we cannot live in safety on our streets or on the streets of anywhere around the world, as we see with rising impunity and regularity as these attacks continue to happen, not just here in the United States, but in Europe and in Asia and so forth. I think the threat is increasingly apparent to Americans. That's one reason why President Obama's foreign policy seems to be so unpopular, because they realize that it's simply not succeeding in counteracting. Oh, we've got Joni, great. It's not succeeding in counteracting the threat that we face, that we have to hit this enemy harder, and we have to hit them faster, and we have to call the enemy by its name. And the president simply isn't doing that, even though a broad majority of not just Republicans, but independents and Democrats all across this country are calling out for it.
General Flynn, before I ask you a question, let me introduce Senator Ernst, who's a former lieutenant colonel in the Iowa National Guard, including a tour in Iraq, where she served as a company commander. She serves in the United States Senate, obviously, from Iowa on the Ag Committee, Armed Services, Homeland Security, and Small Business, and she came to Washington to make them squeal, and I think she's doing a pretty good job of that. So, General, could you give us a perspective? So can you walk us through, just sort of skip us through, but from the nature of the threat that you were trained as when you first got your commission, to the nature of the threat the United States is facing today, what's the scope and scale of that as you're thinking about it? And I'm thinking particularly about your new book, obviously, but can you just give us a sense of how that's changed and emerged over the years?
Yeah, I sure will. Can you hear me? Okay, I can yell loud. How about now? Better? Okay, there you go. There you go. Okay. So I did just, I wrote a book. I started it last summer, and I wanted it published. It was published on the 12th of July. I wanted it published before both conventions. That was the goal of writing the book, because of the message that's in this book. And we've all been talking about it this morning. We've been talking about it actually for far too long. So before I really get into the answer, I want to just say that what you have up here on the bookends of me are two veterans who are serving in our Congress. And if there's one thing that this country needs to do, it needs to encourage more veterans at local, state, and national level to get into the political process. We have so many people that are in our Congress that have no clue what our military is made up of or what our military men and women are doing these days. So, it's just a sort of if there's a political soapbox for me, that's it. On this enemy that we are facing, I agree with some of what's been said. It's already here. What you're going to find out about this murder of these police officers down in Baton Rouge is that he's a member of what's called the Nation of Islam. Okay, the Nation of Islam, you can say what you want, and I'll argue and debate with the leader of the Nation of Islam all day long, who comes across as a very legitimate person, but they're not. They breed in our prison systems. Never mind overseas. So we are facing a political, this is a political ideology that's based on a religion, or they say it's based on a religion. So this is a political system. The Islamic Republic of Iran, the Islamic Republic of Pakistan. We gave the name to Afghanistan, the government of the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan in 2004. We helped write the Constitution for Afghanistan. We, the United States, put Sharia law into their constitution during the Bonn Agreement, 2004. Most people don't even read these things. They don't even read them because we have no idea. We don't understand what it is that we're facing. And we have a president today, and we've had other leaders too, but we have a president today that does not allow our nation, our government, to really call it what it is, and then confuses it by continuing to say the kinds of things that he says. And so there's no clarity in exactly what it is that we are facing. Now, I could go on and on about all these other things that this previous panel talked about, because I am almost in total disagreement with the governor of Ohio. The only thing I'm in agreement with is when he talked about Radio Free Europe, although it's not Radio Free Europe anymore. It's called social media, and up on your right screen there, you got Twitter going on. I mean, this morning I get ISIS social media every day. Every day I get fed. They have their own version of CNN. It's called Al Amaq, and they are outstanding. It's an incredibly professional organization. So I get their drumbeat, and they're talking about the axing in Würzburg, Germany, in this train. 17 people hit with an axe, so we're going to ban all axes, I guess, if that happens here in this country. 4 of the people that were axed were 4 members of a family, 2 children and a mother and father that were just going out for a holiday. They're riding on a train. A illegal immigrant, in this case, I'm going to back that up because he wasn't illegal. He was allowed into the country. An immigrant that was allowed into Germany is the one that did it. Directed by ISIS, not inspired by ISIS. Okay? But all the other things that we talk about here, I mean, I'm just stunned. I'm stunned by the way the United States is operating today, and back to the issue of the radical Islam. We are losing. We're losing this war. We are definitely losing this war.
Senator, from your point of view, Senator Ernst, from your point of view, serving in the Guard, serving overseas in Kuwait during the Iraq War, and also from your point of view on the Armed Services Committee, what's your sense of, just kind of lay it out for us, what is the palpable difference between a de minimis U.S. military capability and a robust and dynamic military capability, and what does that mean for the officers on the ground, and as a policymaker, what do you think that means?
Absolutely. It is very important that the United States project strength, and that is something that we have not seen in the last 8 years. And I can break it down at the very basic level. I was a company commander for a transportation unit, 150 soldiers strong. We ran convoys through Kuwait and southern Iraq at the beginning of the Iraq War in 2003. So just as a demonstration, one thing that my company would do when we ran convoys into Kuwait, we would mount our heavy machine guns, our 50 cals, our Mark 19s. We would put as many as we could on one single convoy. Not that we needed that much firepower, but we would mount them in our convoy just as a show or a demonstration of power, because those along the roadsides, if they saw a convoy coming that was heavily armed, they were less likely to attack. That is a demonstration of power. So that's at that very basic level. Now take that up to the national scale. Not that we use those weapons, mind you, but we had them and we could have, and the enemy knew that. They knew that. But take that up to the national level, and if you have a strong nation, a nation with a strong national security stance, you have a strong army, you have a strong Navy, Marine Corps, Air Force, then you can demonstrate that. But other countries are less likely to test that if you have that strength. So I do believe it is important that we have a strong military, and we hope that with a strong military, we would never have to use it. But the fact of the matter would be that as a United States, we should have that show of strength, that show of power through a strong military. Right now, we have a diminished military capability, and you will hear our vice chiefs of staff, our chiefs of staff, say that our readiness is not as strong as it used to be. We are downsizing our troop strength across the United States, whether it's in the Guard, the Reserve, or active duty forces. So we are diminishing our power and as a world leader out there. So many other countries have asked us, and I know this has been stated before, but every time we are at security conferences, whether they're in Munich, whether they're in Singapore, other countries are asking us, where is American leadership? Where is American leadership? We have really abdicated our role on the world stage when it comes to providing leadership to make sure that our world is a safer place. Many years ago, President Obama drew that red line in Syria. All of us remember that line very well. But yet, he refused to enforce that red line in Syria. And earlier this year, I was at a conference. A colleague, Dan Sullivan, Marine reservist, also a veteran. We were sitting together at that conference. There was a leader from Syria who is no longer in Syria, no longer in power in Syria. And he said, I remember quite clearly when the president drew that red line in Syria and we thought there was hope. And he said, and then the United States failed to enforce it. And he said, all hope was lost. All hope was lost. They were counting on us to back up that red line in Syria, and we didn't. So now what does that say to our adversaries around the world? They say, we know the United States doesn't mean what they say. We know that they will not back us up. They have demonstrated that. We were in Singapore not long ago at the Shangri-La Dialogue, and the Prime Minister of Singapore had stated that, and he uses that as an example also, that, you know, the red line was drawn a long time ago and the United States has lost its power on the world front. So we need to project power. We need to rebuild our military strength. I think that's very important. And we need an administration which recognizes that you can have a strong military. Hopefully you won't have to use it.
Senator Cotton, pick up on that theme, would you? So this notion of projecting American power, projecting American strength, can you give insight as a United States Senator who's been wrestling with these ideas of the relationship between economic strength and military strength, and some of the challenges as it relates to discretionary funding of the military, spending that's out of control in other areas, but particularly the relationship between economic strength and military strength?
Sure. So the credibility of our deterrent around the world is based on two main things. One, the word of the American president, and two, the capability of our military. Right now, our president's word, as Joni described, is not taken very seriously around the world. Unfortunately, the capability of our military is continually eroding because of severe budget cuts under the Obama administration. The economy obviously pays for our military. Some people say, oh, we spend too much. We spend, more than the next 6 or 7 combined. Well, I would say that there are a few good reasons for that. One, we are a continental nation with global trading interest and global security interest, unlike any other nation on America or any other nation in the world. Therefore, we need global power. Two, like any major modern organization, the biggest cost of our military is personnel costs. And we have some of the highest wages in the world, and we have an all-volunteer force. I think that's something we should be proud of, as opposed to paying near-poverty wages in a conscript force, the way a lot of our adversaries have to. And three, security competition in the world is not the Olympics. It's not like the 50-meter butterfly or the 100-meter dash. It's not good enough to just beat your adversary by an inch or have a photo finish, because all that does is to encourage them to challenge you in the first place. You have to be so far ahead of them that they will never think of challenging you to begin with. Now, on the economic side, it's clear that our budget deficits are not driven by our military. They're driven by a weak economy that doesn't produce enough tax revenue. They're driven by health and retirement programs that are poorly structured for the changing demographics of our society. If anything, our military helps promote economic growth and therefore promote the tax revenue we need to fund all government programs by keeping trading lane opens for interest, by minimizing security competition with our trading partners so they can continue to produce and work with us. So the idea that our military is somehow responsible for our government deficits, the idea that it's not intimately linked to our economic prosperity is a specious one, which I totally reject.
Well, on behalf of the audience, I want to thank our panel today. Let's give them a round of applause. Thank you. Good. Thank you. Thanks. Thank you, General. Thanks, Senator. Yeah, thank you.
So I met Paul Ryan in 1998 when we were both running for Congress from the great, great state of Wisconsin. Now, Paul and I have a lot in common. We worship at the same church, Lambeau Field. We studied the same subjects, hunting and fishing. We both squeezed out every spare moment in our congressional careers for our families. And we made darn sure we didn't take ourselves too seriously, even though we took our responsibilities and the sacred opportunity of serving in Congress very seriously indeed. Our friendship has grown over the years, and so has my admiration for Paul and his leadership. On the night that Paul was named Speaker, he whispered to me, this wasn't part of the plan. Maybe not his plan. In these challenging times, people ask me where Reagan's vision and Kemp's optimism have gone. I point to the Agenda for a Better Way from House Republicans. Here are just a few of the section titles of that document. Winning the Battle of Ideas, Countering Our Adversaries and Supporting Our Allies, Promoting Prosperity through Free Markets and Strategic Investments, Expanding the Community of Free Societies. Under Paul's leadership, the Better Way agenda is, in fact, a better way. And his points on American leadership, they are music to our ears. Ladies and gentlemen, my friend, your speaker, democracy's champion, Paul Ryan.
Thanks, buddy. Appreciate it. Actually, our commitment goes even farther than that. We're both owners of the Green Bay Packers. Yeah. And so can you for $400. You can buy a share of the Green Bay Packers. And it says right below the stock certificate, not transferable. So, first of all, Mark is one of my best friends of all time in politics and in life. So I want to thank Mark Green and the IRI for what you do for us, for leading us. I see Peter here, and I see you've probably heard from some of our other members. Let me go into, very briefly, why, on a better way, we decided we wanted to put an agenda out. We discussed this back in October, Peter will remember. And then in January, we met together as all House Republicans, and we said, we don't like the direction the country is headed. We think America is making the wrong choices. And we have to come together to figure out exactly what we would do differently and then offer that agenda to the country so that in 2016 we can seek by acclamation a mandate from the nation to do what needs to be done to get our country back on the right track. There are 6 big pieces of it. I will talk about one today. How do we secure America? How do we have a foreign policy doctrine that is in keeping with our traditions but also in keeping with our interests? Let's look at the backstop behind all of that. Let's look at the Obama-Clinton foreign policy. Look at what we got in the first 4 years. The Iraq SOFA. We didn't get a SOFA with Iraq. So as a result, even the stated goal of having a footprint in Iraq afterwards did not materialize, and as a result, we saw chaos ensue. A president, I remember this, I was in the 2012 campaign with Mitt when this was made. A president drew a very clear red line. And then that red line was very clearly crossed, and the president didn't do anything about it. That, to me, was one of the biggest mistakes. Saying something so clearly on behalf of the world's superpower and then not doing anything about it. When that happened, I believe people were taking our stock. Combine that with the reset of Russia. Then combine that with the Iranian agreement, where now we have a Secretary of State basically acting like the Tehran Chamber of Commerce president. And what we have here is a really, really bad mixture. What we have here is, combined with sequester and a hollowing out of our military, we have got a superpower that is filling the world with ambiguities, filling the world with questions, filling the world with, are you the America we know and trust and like and want and can count on, or are you now something else? So it really is not cliche to say that our adversaries don't fear us like they used to, and our allies quite aren't sure if they can trust us like they used to. So that's what we see with now the rise of ISIS out of this chaos. That's what we see without a comprehensive strategy to take on the ideology and the recruitment of global jihad. And so we in Congress decided normally the president is the quarterback on foreign policy. Normally the commander-in-chief sets the tone and the tenor and maps out the strategy. That's not happening. It's not going in the right direction, so we need to do that. We need to show what it looks like, what we believe a good, strong foreign policy looks like for the world and the country to see, so that we can run on this and try and earn ourselves a mandate to put it in place. Many components. Actually, if you go to better.gop, you'll read our 67-point plan on how we improve our foreign policy. I would just say a few things. Number one, we do have to secure the border. We do have to make sure that we know who's coming and going. We do have to have a visa tracking system. We have members of Congress who know exactly how to put this in place because they spent years working on it. Number two, there is absolutely no substitute for American bold leadership in the world. Standing up for our ideals, standing up for our belief, standing up for our belief of self-determination with human rights, freedom, democracy. These are things that we should not shrink from, but we should be proud of. And so we have to build the capacity to actually export these ideas. That's hard power, soft power, and everything in between. It's civilian, it's military, and all the rest. It's trade, it's everything. And so we need to keep building that capacity. We also have to make sure that when we do and say things that we back them up. And in order to do that well, we have to have a military in the 21st century capable of doing its job and not stretching ourselves too thin, and making sure that we have the tools and the technology that is unsurpassable and unreachable. I do worry that we are degrading ourselves to the point where we're tempting others. We're tempting other countries. You may be able to catch us. It's not that far. We should never let such a thing happen. And so that is why you'll see in our defense authorization bill a rededication to building up our military, a rededication to modernizing our military, modernizing our procurement system, and all the rest. And so we believe in a confident country and a confident America that is confident in our founding principles. We believe in democracy and freedom and self-determination. We believe that what we can do is help set a predicate or a foundation for economic growth through the rule of law, through trade, through freedom, through opportunity. And we believe that security and the promotion of our values are the things that will help not only make us more secure and more prosperous, but help keep the global commons more secure and more prosperous. And so whether we're talking about our Pacific policy, or whether we're talking about Europe and NATO, or whether we're talking about the Middle East and containing the proliferation of terrorism and nukes, or whether we're talking about just making sure that we can trade with one another on a level playing field with the rule of law being applied, enforceable contracts. All of these things don't happen without American leadership. And so that is the big concern we have with the stakes of this election. I think the incumbent party is the party that has retreated. They've retrenched. They have pulled back really far. And as a result, we're less safe. As a result, we've seen the rise of ISIS. As a result, we don't really have a strategy to confront the ideology of global radical Islamic extremism. And so we've got work to do ahead of us. And we think by showing our ideas and showing our plans and showing our visions, we have a better way of fixing these things. And so this is what we're offering to the country, and this is what we're going to be spending a lot of our year talking about. We're also talking about entitlement reform and economic growth and tax reform, fixing our Constitution so that we are reapplying our Constitution and reapplying the principle of self-government, getting people out of poverty and reforming our welfare system. It's a soup-to-nuts plan to take on our biggest challenges. But since we're here at the IRI talking about renewing our national security tools, talking about making sure that our policy is known and clear and strong and bold and confident, that is what we want to ask the country for permission to do. I'm a budget guy, and I know how these things work. We're going to have to rebuild our budget. And that includes taking on the fiscal challenges that are in front of us, taking on the drivers of our debt, and also making sure that we can free up the fiscal space we need so that we can have the military that we need, so that the men and women who are flying planes are flying ones that are well-built, that they're well-maintained, so that they're getting the training hours that they need, so that we're not stretching people with 3, 4, 5 deployments in 6 years, 5 years. We need to make sure that we give ourselves the ability to rebuild our military so that they can actually do their job and do it well. That's what I see as the big fork in the road for our country. And we do see 2016 as one of those punctuating years, which is going to basically make that determination which direction we're going to go. And so please know that you see in front of you a Republican Party in Congress very soundly and very squarely in great knowledge of who we are and what we believe. We know what kind of country we want. We know what kind of foreign policy we want. We know what kind of defense policy we want. We know what we need to do to improve our security posture. And so just know that that's solid and know that that is there, and know that we're going to do everything we can this year to offer this agenda to the country, to have this kind of conversation. Because the last thing I would say is this, and if Mitt Romney were standing here, he'd tell you the same thing. We always want to strive to make elections about clear choices of ideas so that those ideas are validated and so that you earn the ability to put those ideas in place. And that's what we wish we could have done more of in 2012. And so one of the reasons why Peter Roskam and myself and all the other 245 House Republicans spent the last 7 months working on these ideas and then rolling them out and taking them to our constituents and to the country is because we want to go earn by acclamation this mandate. We want to have this debate in the country. We want to litigate these ideas. We want to draw a contrast with the failed foreign policy of the Obama administration, which will simply be continued if a Clinton administration were to occur. We want this conversation. We want it up close and in the center of this debate so that if and when we win this, then we will have earned ourselves that mandate. So I just want to say, as a fan of IRI for many, many years, even before one of my best friends took over the helms of the IRI. Excuse me. I'm an Irish guy. Sorry, I apologize. Yeah. Even before Mark Green took over the IRI, it's been a beacon for us. What you're doing to confront Soviet propaganda, what you're doing to confront the radicalism, what you're doing to actually expand democracy around the world, it's what we take leadership cues from. It's really what emboldens us. So I just want to say to everybody, thank you for being here. And Mark, thank you so much for what you all do. Take care. Hey, Tom, I didn't see you there.
Ladies and gentlemen, that's our program for today. I think you heard a little bit about the leadership that we hope to have going forward. Thank you for your support. Thank you for being here, and we look forward to continuing the conversation. Thanks very much.